The whole. Got much to light up. The whole thing on top.
Always, every day.
No, it's not usually like this. Okay. Good evening. Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to, before we start, I'm going to use this opportunity for some shameless advertising. Tonight is the first of the 5-part series of Shiurim dealing with science, technology, and halakha. You're all encouraged to attend. If you're watching this on Zoom, you can watch on Zoom as well. If you're watching the recording after the shiur has already been, it's already on YouTube now, so you can watch there. So there's no excuse not to watch it. But tonight is the first shiur. You may have seen, somebody mentioned it to me on my way into shul this evening. Rav David Lau, the chief rabbi, has just published a chavat da'at hilchatit, a halachic opinion regarding the question of lab-grown meat, whether it's kosher or not. I won't tell you what he says because I haven't read it yet. It's 11 pages. But I'll tell you what I say, but you have to come at 8 o'clock to hear. So that's that. No, you have to read all 11 pages before you know what he said. But you can read the whole thing. Okay. So last night we spoke about an interesting question. That's the future technology. We were talking about now what's already the past technology, talking about phones and the internet, the old stuff. And we started last night talking about this question, right? Can you, when it's Shabbat where you are, it's still Shabbat where you are. Well, no, sorry. It's not Shabbat where you are, right? Shabbat hasn't come in or Shabbat has gone out. Can you pick up the phone or Zoom to somebody across the world where for them it is Shabbat? So we said if the other person on the other side is Jewish, that would be a problem. That would be a problem of Lifnei Iver. If the person on the other side is not Jewish, so according to most poskim we discussed last night, that would not be a problem. There is, I just wanted to mention.
So what if you know their phone's going to be turned off and you want to leave them a message?
If their phone's off and you want to leave them a message.
Right, so it's still Shabbat for them.
The other person's
Not
Jewish.
Shabbat for you, they're Jewish.
Right.
So you're sending them a message, but they're not going to open it on the last Shabbat.
Okay, so if you know the person, again, if the person on the other side, you know that they are Shomer Shabbat and they're not going to hear the message until after Shabbat, so there's no problem, right? The more interesting question is, if they're not Shomer Shabbat, and you're going to leave them, for whatever reason, it's the middle of the night there, you expect them to be asleep, but you're going to leave them the message, but they're going to, or you send them a text, and then chances are they're going to read it on Shabbat itself. So that's a bit more questionable. We'll come to that. That actually relates to another question I want to discuss this evening. But just going on with this point. So if the person on the other side is not Jewish, so we mentioned most of the poskim say that it's okay. There's actually Rav Zilberstein has a very interesting, difficult to understand approach over here. But he says, he quotes, we have a halakha in Shulchan Aruch regarding Havdalah. The candle that we use to light the Havdalah candles, so we know that usually a person comes home after shul, lights the candle after Shabbat, and there's no question. Not like Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we need an Ersha Shabbat that's been lit throughout the day. But if you had a light there was a candle that was lit on Shabbat, but Isur, you would not be allowed to make Havdalah on that light, right? So somebody, for whatever reason, lit a candle on Shabbat day, you're not allowed to. Don't do this at home. But if somebody did, and that light was still lit, somebody says, I don't have another candle, can I use this for Havdalah? The answer is no. Shulchan Aruch says no. If it was lit, the heter, it was lit for pikuach nefesh, or something, and you were allowed to light it, then you can use it for Havdalah. Very interestingly, then the Shulchan Aruch continues. He says, if a non-Jew lit a candle on Shabbat, can you then use that candle on Motzei Shabbat for Havdalah? The answer is no. He says the language is,
The candle of the fire. Assuming you put out the fire,
you can relight whatever you want. We're talking about something, the fire was lit on Shabbat. That's the case. So it says, this is the example the Shulchan Aruch gives. If a non-Jew that's a candle on Shabbat, since if it had been a Jew who had lit the candle on Shabbat, that would have been a transgression. And therefore, he says, Lo Shabbat v'menechet avera mikri. So says the Shulchan Aruch, it's considered in some way that this candle was a candle which had melacha done to it. Even though the non-Jew is not transgressing anything, he's allowed to light the candle on Shabbat. Nonetheless, this still has a name of a candle that had melacha done on it. And based on that, says Rav Zilberstein, that he thinks there's a concept of basically that's still melacha, even though it's done by the non-Jew. And in our case, to talk to the non-Jew on the phone when it's still Shabbat for him, he says, based on this Shulchan Aruch, he says that would be forbidden. Just wanted to mention it because I thought it's interesting. But as I said, it's not the way that the majority of poskim go. Majority of other poskim say no, where there is no concern. Again, non-Jew is not required to refrain from Melacha on Shabbat. Therefore, you could talk to him on the phone. Again, with all the caveats that we mentioned yesterday. Which brings us to another question. Again, this was published 20 years ago in B'Marial Bazak, the Shutim of Eretz Chemda, but it relates to a bunch of 5-6 different questions here with different variations regarding one who has an internet site. Are you allowed? This was the days before smartphones, before apps, before any of this, but we had websites, and there are different functions and different features which a website can perform. You could have a website that you have which just provides information. You could have a website which has where people can download things or can pay. So it's essentially providing a service where people have to pay in order to access the content, right? Or you could have a website which is e-commerce where you're selling things, right? And somebody can go in and buy all these different forms of websites. Is one allowed to leave their website up and running and functional on Shabbat? What's the concern? What could be the issue? So they list over here 6 possible issues that might be. So we don't normally do this. I want to open it up to the floor at this point. What do you, and this is the question, we'll discuss some of the reasons, but what do people think? If I have a website, do I have a responsibility before Shabbat comes in to shut the website down? Not all at once. Huh? ArtScroll does, that's true. The question is again, turn it off when and for who? Meaning, if I go on, when it's not Shabbat for me,
making profit out of it, the only difference is earning on Shabbat. E-commerce.
Right, e-commerce, you might be making a profit from things that happen on Shabbat. We might be in the past, we've spoken about Schar Shabbat. We've spoken about the idea of hiring somebody. It comes up, believe it or not, it comes up in shul context as well, right? You hire somebody to perform a service on Shabbat, which is not, obviously not to do any malacha, but you hire somebody to run activities or whatever. Can you pay them for the work they're doing on Shabbat? We've discussed that in previously, spoke about Havla'ah and other things. So that is one of the issues that's raised. There are, as I mentioned, there are 6 issues. There's probably more, but there are at least 6. And the first one, which relates to some of the things which we've spoken about already, and this would be applicable to a website, whether it's e-commerce, maybe even if there's no service, maybe if it's just a website that provides information, this might be the same thing as well, which is the question of Lifnei Iver. We already spoke about Lifnei Iver. Right. Again, I'm not giving a psak yet. I'm not giving a ruling. I'm just raising the issues. So, but Lifnei Iver means the Torah tells us Lifnei Iver lo titen michshol. Don't place a stumbling block in front of the blind. Right. One of the questions in Lamdanot people always love to discuss is if you placed an actual stumbling block in front of a blind person, don't do it. You're not allowed to do it. But is that a transgression of the prohibition of Lifnei Iver lo titen michshol? Remarkably, many poskim say no. They say it could be in the Rambam that if you had placed a stumbling block literally in front of somebody, that is not what the Torah is talking about here. The Torah is talking about something figurative. The continuation of the pasuk says, "Ifnei velo titein michshol v'yareitem elokecha ani Hashem." Right, so there are those who learn that just as the end of that pasuk is talking about why does it say, we find this in Parashat Kedoshim, in a number of the different mitzvot and different psukim there, it says, Yareitem Elokecha ani Hashem. Why does the Torah add that emphasis? It may be to tell us certain things other people can't see, other people don't know, but Hashem knows. And you have to be, so there are certain things which are hidden, certain things which people can't see. You give somebody bad advice. You act in a certain way that allows a person or encourages a person to transgress, whatever it may be. Maybe no one knows. Only Kadosh Baruch Hu knows, but that's something which is hidden. If you place something on the ground in front of somebody where they're going to Shabbat, so people can see that. The blind person himself can't, but people can't see that, and maybe that might be a reason why the pasuk is not actually referring to that, but referring figuratively. But everybody agrees that this pasuk Lifnei velo titein michshol refers to if I'm acting in a way that allows somebody else to transgress or that causes somebody else to transgress. That would be a problem. So the question becomes, and again, there is an entire gamut of halachic literature regarding, there are books called Lifnei velo titein michshol. What are the parameters of the Yisur? When does it apply? General rule of thumb is the more direct something is, and the more direct my action leads to the person transgressing, then it's more likely that that would be a prohibition of lifnei iver. Whereas the more indirect that it becomes, the more removed it becomes, we'll find opinions, the Rishonim and the Achronim, to say this is not the case, that these parameters remove it from the question of lifnei iver. So the question is, I have a website, now it's on Shabbat, I'm not doing anything, right, in front of the, I'm not actively doing anything, I'm not there, I don't even know who the person is, they happen to be somewhere else, wherever they are, they're on their computer, they're on their phone, whatever it may be, and they access the website. Am I therefore responsible for lifnei iver, for causing them to break Shabbat? So the first thing we have to look at, the major distinction, which the Rishonim talk about when it comes to lifnei iver, is whether we have chad avred nahara or trei avred nahara, which means, is it on the same side of the river or the other side of the river? The example which the Gemara gives is that if you have a Nazir, next week, we're starting Nazir, you have a Nazir who is not allowed to drink wine, right? And if you were to give wine to the Nazir, that would be a transgression, that would be a michshol, right? That would be lifnei iver. So the question is, if you're on one side of the river with the wine and he's on the other side and he cannot reach it by himself, it's impossible for him to reach it unless you give it over and you pass it to him. That would certainly be the Yisur D'Oraita of lifnei iver lo titen michshol, of creating that stumbling block. If, however, the situation is where he is able to access it, he could have gotten it without you anyway, right? And but then you still happen to give it to him. So, were you not to give it? You still placed this stumbling block in front of him. You still created the situation of Yisur. But were you not to be there, he could have done it anyway. So that, according to most poskim, will not be lifnei iver on a D'Oraita level, but nonetheless, there is still an Isur D'Rabanan of Messiah, of assisting him, of assisting somebody in their transgression. So the first question, based on that, the website, there are millions, probably more, of websites in the world, right? A person wants to sit and wants to go into a person chooses to go into the internet, they can go into your website, they can go into anybody else's website. It's highly unlikely to say that this would be lifnei iver, because if it wasn't for you, they couldn't transgress. They could go on, they'd find somewhere else, they'd find a different website to buy from, to order from, to watch, or whatever it is. Unless you're the owners of Google, maybe, I don't know. But so that is the first point, that probably would not be lifnei iver. It might be Messiah. Yeah.
That's why Art Scroll, because there are no other. Art Scroll is specific, and it's also specific to Jews. So that's why they can't pick up any of those tools.
Okay, so that's a nice hour, meaning if your website is providing a specific service that nobody else can provide, then that would be
for Jews.
Right. Assuming that's yeah.
It seems like the moment he turns on his phone and the moment he turns on his computer, then he's already violated Shabbat, and he's doing that completely of his own volition. So it seems like anything that would follow that is not really the violation. He's already done the violation the moment he turned his thing on Shabbat.
Well, he's done one violation there. The question is, how many different transgressions are there, right? It's a tremendous, I'll just end with this. There's a tremendous debate amongst the poskim, and things change, as electricity and the way that these devices work and the way that we use them has changed over the years. What exactly is, we could spend months just talking. What is the issur on Shabbat of using a phone, of using the internet, a computer, etc.? Everybody agrees it's asur. Don't misunderstand. But is it D'Oraita? Is it D'Rabanan? Let's discuss. Is there here an issue of ktiva? Is it an issue of boneh? Is it an issue of molid? Is it an issue of uvdin d'chul? Is it an issue of makeh b'patish? Could be any of those things. Could be all of them. Could be none of them. So depending on who you follow. But certainly it could be every time that a person clicks, every time that a person types, every time that a person swipes. According to Rosh Weiss, every time that you press a key, press a button, swipe on your phone, that could be an Isur D'Oraita. That's how he holds. So each one of those could be, that's a question in terms of causing it. But as we said, the website itself, at least regarding the first issue, lifnei iver, probably not an issue. Messiah still might be an issue, but there's obviously a lot more to discuss. But I'll talk about that tomorrow. Rabbi Kenigsberg,